As defending champions of the National Football Conference, the Minnesota Vikings confidently entered 1977, accompanied by a nagging counterpoint. Though 3 NFC crowns in 5 seasons proved them to be the giants of their kingdom, skepticism concerning their continued rule was flourishing. Those who spread such thoughts cited the young, improving Chicago Bears and Minnesota's advancing years, then produced their strongest point. Other than 10 opponents in common with the Bears, Minnesota had to play Oakland, Dallas, Cincinnati, and San Francisco, teams which posted 41 wins the year before. Chicago, on the other hand, would oppose New Orleans, the New York Giants, Kansas City, and Houston, teams which collectively totaled only 17 wins 1 year earlier. Add Minnesota's loss in Super Bowl XI, and critics seemed to have a case. Yet the Vikings themselves knew better.
The suggestion that has been made that after having lost 4 Super Bowls that, the Vikings have had it. Of course, that suggestion was made, I think, 3 times before. Each time we've come back and won our division the next year, I don't think it's any less likely that the same thing will happen this year. Everybody says the Bears are a much improved football team, and they are. They're a much better football team. But that doesn't, account for the fact that we're still a pretty good football team ourselves.
We've been called lucky, and, they say we live in a tree and all this sort of thing. But we are successful enough to have gone to the Super Bowl more than any other team in football. And I think this is a very important factor. You can't get there on just luck.
People forget what it takes to get to the Super Bowl, and they kind of make predictions or make judgments of teams through the Super Bowl. And they don't realize that only 2 teams play the Super Bowl, 26 others watch you on TV. But we aren't by any means losers. We win consistent. And so I'd just like to say that to all the so-called experts that I'd like to see them do their homework, and we'll be back there again.
On a Sunday evening in Dallas, these men stood only 1 game away from their promise. But in the NFC Championship, the world champion-to-be Cowboys would spin a concluding chapter to a remarkable Viking tale. Minnesota's presence in the NFC Championship confirmed this squad to be one of pro football's 4 best. That they were, against such competition and such odds, proved once again the Minnesota Vikings are a team for all times, a team for all seasons. In the land of the midnight sun, the Minnesota Vikings patrol this theater of seasons. Their domain, Metropolitan Stadium, can offer blue skies in September. But by November, opponents know it can quickly turn cold and foreboding. Such conditions, wherever found, favor no one. But Viking philosophy is such they never expect to feel comfortable. Football is not a comfortable game. A Viking credo has always been, where there's a will, there's a way. And more often than not, an effort such as this one by number 43, Nate Wright, has resulted from a fixed team belief.
There's no one man on the team that can produce a victory for us. It takes everyone. It's pretty much our philosophy that we all have a job to do, and we have to do it effectively, before we can win.
'77 saw many Vikings doing their job. One was wide receiver Ahmad Rashad, whose 51 catches led the NFC. Rashad's aerial acrobatics were matched in style by the pinwheel runs of Chuck Foreman, number 44. Efforts by Foreman produced over 1,100 rushing yards. And with the NFL's most prolific quarterback at the helm, Fran Tarkenton, there was little question that Minnesota's offense could parade with the NFL's best as 1977 began. Things were not so cut and dried, however, with the Vikings' defense. And there was but one reason for uncertainty here, and that was age. Of the 11, those singled out immediately were the front four. Some felt defensive tackle Alan Page was more interested in studying law than creating new ways to dismantle sweeps. Number 88 would overrule such testimony. Others claimed 40-year-old defensive end Jim Marshall would easily tire from the chase and simply give out. But after his 18th season, his consecutive game total reached 250, and such talk tired long before number 70 did. With 14 sacks, defensive end Carl Eller, number 81, put to rest notions that the strain of 14 NFL seasons had worn down his competitive mean streak. Add Doug Sutherland, number 69, and Minnesota's front was formidable. If they were weak, at season's end, there were opponents who wished for such weakness. Still, on opening day, the Dallas Cowboys encouraged critics everywhere. The Vikings lost in overtime. Then doubters singled out a narrow 9-3 win over Tampa Bay as further proof Minnesota was floundering. Those who looked closely, however, observed otherwise, for veteran Viking watchers saw the pieces were coming together. Beating the Buccaneers, the newest member of the NFC Central, especially satisfied head coach Bud Grant, for he has always maintained the success of any season first begins with Viking domination of their own division. Standing head and shoulders above NFC Central opponents has always required finding new and innovative ways to win. So it was that on successive Sundays, Detroit was outmaneuvered and Green Bay overrun. Only one divisional foe remained. However, beating up and coming Chicago in Week 5 would require the Vikes to work overtime. Here, number 14, Fred Cox, trotted in to perform his specialty. But instead of Cox, it would be holder Paul Krause who would inject this overtime short story with a dramatically different closing line. This 22-16 victory finalized an early season Central Division sweep. With their record now at 4-1, a team for all seasons had cleared up some early misconceptions. Year in and year out, Minnesota climbs to the top of the NFL with a team experts say is too old. But while it's true the roots of their winning tradition wind back to the 60s, today there are also many young players like Sammy White who fearlessly uphold the Viking standard. The 1976 Rookie of the Year became a defensive target in 1977. Yet Sammy's all-out drive for the ball was never affected as number 85 averaged almost 19 yards per reception and led the NFC with 9 touchdown catches. A starter since his very first pro game, Sammy White is the exception rather than the rule, for most young Vikings need time. Indeed, it took 4 years for linebacker Fred McNeil to crack the starting lineup and join middle linebacker Jeff Seaman. Both continue to fill much-needed special team duties, along with such players as snapper Doug Dumler, Manfred Moore, Scott Studwell, Nate Allen, James White, and Mark Mullaney, number 77. Punter Neil Claybo puts the ball in play, and these are the men who make Minnesota's bomb squad special. Those who call the Vikings conservative don't recognize the risks and rewards involved. For block kicks by men like starting linebacker Matt Blair are hardly low-risk adventures. In 1977, Blair denied 7 possible points with 4 block kicks, and once number 59 scored a touchdown. But after winning 4 of their first 5, the initial signs of an oncoming storm were viewed upon the horizon. The season would not be easy from this time on. Uncharacteristic turnovers haunted the Vikings and beat them at their own game. Lopsided defeats against Los Angeles and St. Louis cast a stain of doubt. But while disappointed, there would be no panic. Because for over 10 years, head coach Bud Grant has schooled his squad with one very basic lesson.
He taught us that winning was a habit. We had the spirit or the esprit de corps or the togetherness before Bud came, but he put it all together and made us a winning football team.
Bud's low-key approach overshadows his highly competitive nature. Minnesota owns more victories than any other NFL team during the 70s. And to Bud Grant's credit, even when opponents know where the Vikings are heading, they have difficulty stopping the men in purple. In truth, opponents can only guess where Minnesota is going. Because once Fran Tarkenton gets his hands on the ball, the only thing for certain is that it will probably end up somewhere downfield. After 17 years, there is nothing he has not done with the forward pass. Whether improvising with a touchdown toss to tight end Bob Tucker or spontaneous with a scoring pass to old reliable Stu Voigt, there was little question if the Vikings were to shake free of a midseason slump, Fran Tarkenton would be the man doing the shaking. Against Cincinnati in the season's 9th week, Fran Tarkenton gathered the Vikings for a dramatic push toward the playoffs. This was vintage Tarkenton, as number 10 ventured every avenue to complete an astounding 17 of 18 passes and seize total control of the game. No one who witnessed such a showing, however, could have envisioned the strange turn of events to follow. For the first time in 17 years, Fran Tarkenton was seriously hurting. His broken leg clouded Minnesota's future, a fact later confirmed by Bud Grant.
Losing somebody like Tarkenton, who in our opinion is the best quarterback in football today, is a loss you can't compensate for in any fashion with any player or by any specific means. So we feel fortunate that we have the quarterbacks that we have.
To close out Cincinnati, number 9, rookie Tommy Kramer came on. But when an early break went against the young quarterback, an uncharacteristic explosion turned a negative situation into a positive one.
There happened to be a play that happened right at my feet that I did see, assuming that then we had the first down and finally one of the officials come in and signaled incomplete pass. Well, I figured if they'd seen that, they would have signaled it immediately, but they didn't, obviously, because it was a completed pass. And I felt that I was justified in trying to vent my excitement at that time because I did see the play right at my feet.
Grant triggered a fourth-quarter chain reaction that concluded in the Minnesota end zone. Tommy Kramer fired his first pro touchdown pass, and number 33, Brent McClanahan, scored twice as Minnesota rolled to their most impressive showing of the season. Beneath the celebration, however, was the subdued reality. A stretch run to the playoffs would have to be made without talented Fran Tarkenton. The Vikings entered Chicago's Soldier Field, totally aware that a victory over the division-challenging Bears meant controlling Walter Payton. The irony that followed saw Payton set a new NFL single-game rushing record with 275 yards, while the Bears would manage just 10 points. Still, it was a bitter defeat, for now a loss to any NFC team would end Minnesota's title quest. Against Green Bay, it took a goal line interception by Bobby Bryant on the last play to keep the Vikings on course. But the next Sunday against San Francisco, Minnesota was facing total elimination with but 12 minutes remaining. Veteran quarterback Bob Lee was then replaced by rookie Tommy Kramer, and the rest is history. With 1 minute and 47 seconds remaining and 69 yards away from victory, the rookie played out his storybook role to perfection. Sammy White carried Minnesota to a 28-27 miracle finish. The Vikings had salvaged their title hopes, and in a complicated scheme of playoff possibilities, it suddenly became as simple as this: beat Detroit in the season's final week, and a fifth consecutive NFC Central title would belong exclusively to the Minnesota Vikings.
In case you haven't heard, sports fans, Bud Grant has made another trade. And this time what he's traded for is the all-new Ford Bronco. He couldn't have made a better pick. Maybe the reason he picked Ford Bronco is because it has an optional part-time four-wheel drive, and Bronco has a shorter turning radius. Or maybe it's because Bronco is built to last up here, with extra heavy frame rails and strong 4x4 front suspension. Or maybe it's because the new Bronco's got elbow room for 6 passengers, with enough space left over for man's best friend like Lance here. Or maybe, just maybe, Bud Grant picked Ford because it's the #1 selling truck line up here in the Northland.
In the Northland.
And Bud Grant likes going with a winner.
Ford is a better idea.
And so it would come down to a one-game season. In the Silverdome, the home of the Detroit Lions, each Viking felt the weight of the role he was to play. But one man felt this burden even more. Veteran quarterback Bob Lee had suffered through a curious season after Tarkenton's injury. A fractured throwing hand and a leg injury limited his effectiveness. Lee's proven skills, however, were remembered by Bud Grant, who said, "Bob has done it for us before, and he'll do it again." Against Detroit, Bud Grant proved prophetic. Bob Lee completed 11 passes for over 200 yards. 8 of these found number 28, Ahmad Rashad. Number 44, Chuck Foreman, topped 100 yards and scored 2 touchdowns. Bob Lee filled in with 2 more on passes as Minnesota beat Detroit 30-21 to at last cradle the Central Division crown. Ahead lay the playoffs and an old nemesis, the Los Angeles Rams. The Vikings headed for sunny California. A funny thing happened on the way to the Los Angeles Coliseum, however. A 2-year drought ended, Given such conditions, only a team for all seasons could win.
Go get it on!
A critical 7-point advantage resulted from the first Viking possession, and then the so-called old men took over.
Come on, defense! Shut him out! Come on, Moose! Pick one off Skinny Minnie.
Nate Allen's end zone theft stole confidence from the Rams' passing attack. And then the Vikings went to work on the Rams' main strength. Minnesota was controlling the game, and by the third quarter, Los Angeles was choking in the mud. This was Viking football, a game where an opponent is driven to careless turnovers, a style every man in purple understands.
It's a one-way street, Krause.
Center Mick Tingeloff, guards Ed White, Charles Goodrum, and tackles Ron Yeri and Steve Riley cleared this street for Chuck Foreman, Robert Miller, and Sammy Johnson. By the fourth quarter, these men were digging a muddy road to victory.
All right! Now we going for the win! Get up in there! Come on, baby! Grab it home! Take it in! Take it in! All right!
Though 9-point underdogs coming in, Minnesota had never lost to Los Angeles in 3 playoff meetings. But when a 14-point lead dwindled to 7 in the game's final minute of play, the Vikings were suddenly hanging on for their playoff lives.
Hey, don't give up no touchdown! Come on, Jim! Come on, Jim! Let him burn that clock up, baby. Don't let him score anything cheap, that's all.
From their own 31, only 7 seconds remained.
Come on.
Jeff Wright's interception sealed victory and sent the Vikings into their 4th NFC Championship game in 6 years. That this team had beaten such a power as Los Angeles could only be explained by something each Viking feels at playoff time.
How do you explain it? Yeah, evidently we wanted it more than they did. It's the only thing I know. What I'm saying is all that happened in the past doesn't mean anything. You can't, beating us 35-3 then, that extra 32 points didn't help you today. We've got the players and the talent. When we play together, you can't be beaten.
For the Minnesota Vikings, 1977 was for proving they were good enough to become champions again. When preseason polls appear for 1978, don't be surprised if the Vikings are not favorites. They'll probably be described as too old, over the hill, while opponents will have the edge because of youth, speed, and scheduling. Judging these assessments from past years, and especially 1977, you can again look for this team come playoff time. As consistent winners often are, the Minnesota Vikings are generally taken for granted. It is an ironic situation for men who continually prove this is a team for all seasons.